Hey everyone, today we're going to be talking about window installation best practices. I'm Rob Campbell, this is Bryant Coogan. Bryant is our in-house expert on WRB systems and business development manager for Rings End.
Thanks, Rob, I appreciate that. Like Rob said, we're going to be talking about a couple different things today. One, what are the different types of weather-resistant barriers that are out in the field when we're building our homes? Two, also the install best practices for Marvin Elevate windows. Before I get onto site, or once I get onto site, excuse me, one thing I like to look at is what type of sheathing are we using? What type of weather-resistant barrier are we going to be using? And again, who is the window manufacturer? This is really going to help us understand how to install that window and also what type of window and door flashings and sealants that we're going to need to use while installing that window as well. We always want to make sure that we follow the install best practices of the window manufacturer to ensure that there is a warranted application. We also want to make sure that we understand the weather-resistant barrier install best practices as well to ensure a warranted application with that as well.
So Bryant, tell me what we're looking at here.
Well, Rob, like I said, one of the things I like to evaluate when I first jump onto site is the type of sheathing that we're actually using. And this, what we're using today, is a 4-ply Douglas Fir CCX plywood, which is one of the ways that we differentiate ourselves from other lumber yards in the area.
So Bryant, tell me a little bit about this Weathermate Plus house wrap.
Well, Rob, that's a good question. Weathermate Plus is what we would consider a traditional house wrap. I know I mentioned before that there are multiple different types of house wraps out in the field. There's a traditional house wrap, there's fully adhered house wrap, there's drainable house wrap, and then there's what we call integrated WRB. Here we're looking at, like Rob said, Weathermate Plus, which is considered a traditional house wrap, traditionally fastened to the wall with tape and staples, whether it's a corrosive resistant fastener or a cap fastener. It can be left to the weather for 4 months without having to be covered up, and it can be used with a lot of different types of siding products, whether it's vinyl, cedar, or fiber cement sidings. But this is really what we see a lot out in the field and people are most traditionally using and comfortable with when they're building homes.
So Bryant, now that we've got our house wrap installed, do you want to talk a little bit about best practices?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see, we have Weathermate installed on the actual structure itself. We use non-corrosive staples in this application for it. A couple things to keep in mind when you are putting the house wrap up. We want to make sure that the printed side is out. There's a technology on the back of this, which we can get into a little bit later, to make sure that we keep all the water out of it. As you notice, we have overlaps. Minimum overlap for Weathermate house wrap is a 2-inch overlap on your horizontal seams. I'm a better safe than sorry guy, and I like to make things as easy as possible on the actual site itself. As you notice on these rolls, there's diamonds. I use that as a reference point when I'm putting this up to make it for easy install when I'm out on site itself. So horizontal seams, min 2 inches. Obviously we did a little bit more here. Vertical seams, we're going to be 4 inches going up the actual wall itself. And when we wrap it around the corner, as you see over here and over by Rob, we want to go 6 inches around the corner and then bring the house wrap back over 6 inches as well. One thing we always want to make sure we do before we start applying our exterior cladding or installing the windows is we want to use an actual seam tape. In today's world, there is a requirement for air barriers on homes to make them airtight. And in order for this to actually be an air barrier, we need to make sure that we're taping our seams both horizontally and vertically with the appropriate seam tape. Yeah.
Now that we've got our house wrap installed and our seams taped, we're ready to prepare our opening. Marvin best practice installation instructions recommend using a modified I-cut. Bryant, can you talk to us a little bit about modified I-cut and how that applies to this house wrap, Marvin, and other WRBs?
Yeah, absolutely, Rob. So like we talked about before, there's different weather-resistant barriers out in the market. And that's why it's really important once you get onto site to understand what weather-resistant barrier that you have, because that's going to dictate how you're going to install this Marvin Elevate window. And what I'm going to do with traditional house wrap like Weathermate, I'm actually just going to draw out the modified eye just to give us a reference point. You don't need to do this on site. We just want to do it here so we have a reference point so we can show you guys a little bit better what Marvin's requirements with a standard house wrap is. We used a pretty big fat Sharpie for you guys to go ahead and see this a little bit better. With the modified eye, we're gonna wanna go ahead and cut straight across the top. And for ease, you also wanna just cut straight across the bottom first. That way your house wrap isn't flapping in the wind and you're trying to cut it. Then what we wanna do is come straight down the middle. And once it's actually cut just like that, there's a really intricate detail that they want you to go ahead and cover and cut to make sure that we install this window appropriately. We want to come 2 inches up onto the actual jamb, a rough opening of your window, and we want to come 4 inches over the side. Once this is all done, then we can fold our house wrap back and get ready to prep the rough opening. One more piece too while we're prepping this rough opening. With traditional house wrap, as we've all seen, is we want to either fold up the header or tuck it underneath. So on here, we want to, at a 45-degree angle, cut 6 inches up on either side of the head of the window itself, so we can fold the head under or fold it up so we can install the window appropriately. So just to highlight one more thing about Weathermate Plus House Wrap is Weathermate actually has 2 different sides to it. Remember I said make sure that the printed side is out? That's for a specific reason. Unfortunately, these house wraps don't work on both sides to keep the water out. They actually do work on both sides to keep the water away from the building though. And I'm gonna show you in a little trick with a nice big Sharpie marker and a piece of Weathermate house wrap. Like I said, printed side out on the actual house wrap itself. And as you notice, the outside's got a little bit of a sheen and a shine to it. That is to keep out wind-driven rain or bulk water from getting into the actual water assembly itself. And this right here is gonna replicate bulk water and also surfactants, which come along with cedar or fiber cement siding out there. And we always need to make sure that we're aware of our exterior cladding and what type of house wrap we're using to make sure we can manage these type of things. So I'm gonna do a big X on this piece right here. And this is gonna show how well Weathermate house wrap can keep out the water. As you see, it doesn't bleed through. But with traditional house wrap, one of the big, and I'll talk about a big downfall is, it takes a lot of fasteners to put it up, right? And then we're installing our exterior cladding on the actual building itself, which are more holes that we're putting through our weather-resistant barrier on a home. And what does that mean? When you have holes in your house wrap, there's a tendency for water to get behind it. And one thing we do not want to do when we're making a house airtight and watertight is trap water behind the house wrap itself. And like I said, there's 2 sides to it. The front side's got a nice coating to it. The back side doesn't. It actually feels more like a fabric itself. And now with the big Sharpie, I'm gonna actually do a big check mark, and it may actually come out and stain this other side. You'll see that the actual Sharpie bleeds through from the back side to the front, which means not if, but when water gets behind it, it's gonna drag water off the wood to the front of your house wrap, which is your continuous drainage plane, allowing water to escape the wood and keep it nice and dry. So now we're actually ready to cut the house wrap and start prepping our rough opening to install this window. Rob, you wanna go ahead? So now that we have these flaps of the actual house wrap themselves, before we actually fold them in, which is a recommendation or depending on preference when you're doing a rough opening, we just want to hold it back just a little bit. I usually take a couple small pieces of tape just to hold it back to make sure that we aren't fighting with the house wrap while we're on site. Oh. Okay. Now, like I said before, with traditional house wrap, we want to cut those 45s on the top. And some people will fold it up like this, but instead of having to carry around a lot of little pieces of tape, this is a trick I learned. Just tuck it right up underneath. That way you have a nice, clean, rough opening to start the prep of your window. Rob, you want to go ahead and open up a window, show people what they need to do?
Yeah, let's do it, Brian.
Cool.
Now that we're ready to install our window, we need to unpackage our window. Here to talk a little bit about Marvin windows and unpacking our windows and some things to look for is Kathy Langen. Kathy is our education coordinator here at Rings End and somewhat of a subject matter expert on windows and doors. Kathy, could you tell us a little bit about what to look for as we unpack our window?
Sure, Rob. Now, once the window is ready to go in, everyone's excited. You just want to get the plastic off, get the cardboard off, and get that window in an opening. But it's really important to be careful and to look for a few things prior to installing the window. So now Rob's going to take the plastic off this window. And one thing that is very important to always keep in mind when you're using a utility knife near a window is that you don't want to damage anything on the window. So best practice would be to remove the plastic on the side where you have the cardboard as your buffer. So Rob's going to do that. And once the plastic is off, you can see there he's being very careful not to cut through because you don't want, as I mentioned, anything sharp to touch the window. And now this window, this is a Marvin Elevate window, and here, this particular window, we have our screen right here, and then there's these straps. We do need to take these shipping straps off so that we can remove the cardboard. You notice Rob's doing that where the knife is nowhere near the screens, and Marvin does a very good job of packing their windows to help prevent any type of shipping damage. So we need to remove all the cardboard that's surrounding the window. So now we have all the cardboard removed from the window. So now there's a few things we need to do prior to getting this window in the opening. The first I would recommend to do is to remove the screens, because screens can be damaged during construction, get dirty, and it's very important to get that screen out of the way and have it in a safe place so it doesn't get damaged. So there's little pins in the corners. As you can see, Rob has opened the lower sash to get those out. Now he's going to close the sash. There we go. We're going to put this in a safe place so it's out of the way. Now that we have the screen out of the way, now we're going to think about other things that need to happen here. So we've removed the screen. What else on this window would we remove? Well, this happens to be a double hung window, so the hardware is already attached. But if you were to have a casement window or an awning window, there would be a package of hardware that would be taped to the window. So that would need to be removed, and as well, put in a safe place, collect all the hardware, put in a bucket, just put it somewhere so it's out of the way and safe, so that when time comes to install the hardware, you know where everything is. So here on the side of the window, this is an Elevate window. On the side of the window, there will always be stapled these corner gaskets. And these are very important to keep track of. These are used as part of the installation of the window, so you do not want to lose these. So these, as well as the screen and the hardware, should be put in a safe spot. So now we've talked about things that need to be removed from the window. We've removed the screen, we've removed the corner gaskets, and we've removed any hardware that's been taped to the window. Now we're going to talk about things to leave. We want to leave the labels on the windows for now, because you'll see this label here has all the energy information that might be pertinent to use for the building official, for energy codes. So you want to leave that label on, as well as any other labels that are on there now. There could be labels that show how to operate the hardware, how to tilt in the sash, and those things will be necessary as the project moves on. So we're going to leave our labels on for now, but we do need to remember that once we get the window in the opening and the window has been installed, the windows have been inspected, then is the time to take the labels off. And you're going to want to remove the labels when there is no sun beating on that window, because what will happen is if there is glue on a label, that sun will soften it and it'll be really hard to take off. And you should be able to take all the labels off with just Windex or soap and water. It may take a little bit of time, but never use anything sharp to scrape the labels off. So another thing in looking at the window that we want to leave for now are, you'll see here these little red pieces here. Those are shipping blocks, and that's letting you know that they are there. You never remove the shipping blocks, or if there was any type of strapping wrapped around the actual window, that you want to leave in place until the window is in place, because that has been put there by Marvin to help prevent damage during shipping, which also will aid you in the installation of the window. Okay, so now we've talked about things that we need to leave on the window and things to remove from the window. Now we're going to take a good look at the window, because now is the time to go over this window and look for any hidden damage that may have happened during shipping. Even though windows are packed really well and there's the plastic and the cardboard, there could be some damage, and you want to find it now. So what you're going to do is you're going to look over the window, look for any type of dings, damage, cracks in the glass. Now is the time to address that. And what you will need to do if you find any damage is here in the corners, in one of the upper corners on the Marvin windows, you'll see a little etching in the glass. I recommend you take a photo of the etching, because then you can blow it up and you can write the numbers off it. Those numbers that are in the etching tell you everything, will tell Marvin everything about that window, what order it was, what line item it was, what type of window, all the information they need to then do what needs to be done to correct any damage. Also, take photos of any damage. So you're going to want photos of the damage, photos of the etching in the glass, and on the packing material, if you can find any labels or anything, it wouldn't hurt to have that as well as a backup.
So now that we've unpacked the window, we're ready to install. So we're going to move this window out of the way. Bryant's going to come back over here, and we're going to talk about preparing this opening to install this window. Thank you for all the information, Kathy. We'll see you again in a little bit.
You're welcome. We'll see you soon.
All right, now we're getting ready to prep our opening to install our window. As you see here, we've got a number of different products we're going to be using to create a system for a weather-tight application. Brian, can you talk to us a little bit about what we're looking at here?
Rob, thank you very much. To your point, there's a bunch of different products here. One of the things that I mentioned earlier was understanding the weather-resistant barrier and what we're going to be using to make sure that we have an appropriate installed window when we leave this job. Now, ideally, what you want to do when you're installing a window is use a full system of products. If the full system of products is not available to you, let's make sure that we understand that we're using compatible products that are in line with what Marvin's install best practices are. And as you can see here, we have a couple different products that we'll review real quickly. One thing we want to do quick is assess to make sure we have everything that we need. When installing a window, per Marvin's install best practices, I like to think about starting from the windowsill and working my way all the way up that rough opening and doing a little bit of a checklist to make sure I have all those products. One thing we always want to make sure we have is a beveled piece of siding. This is not required by Marvin, but recommended to allow water to drain out of that system if it gets in a lot faster. Another product we want to look at is a stretch wrap. This here, where you're actually using Zip Systems stretch tape, which we'll get into later when we cover the Zip products. Another product we want to look at is the appropriate caulk that's going to comply with Marvin and the actual weather-resistant barriers install best practices. We can get into the specifics of this later, but always double check your actual caulk itself as well. Another one is the actual window flange flashing itself. Marvin requires non-rubberized asphalt flashing on their PVC flanged windows. I know we've been doing this forever and a day, and we've been using rubberized asphalt flashing for quite a while, but now a lot of materials have changed. And we work in a lot of different environments. Using a butyl or better flashing like 3M, which is an acrylic adhesive, is going to allow us to work in a lot of different temperatures and a lot of different environments to ensure that we're going to get appropriate adhesive to the window flanges and also to the weather-resistant barrier that's there as well. So now that we're ready to install the window, we always want to go over and make sure we have all the products we're going to need to install the window itself. I like to work from the bottom of the window, work my way up, and kind of do a little bit of a checklist to ensure we have everything we're going to need. And of course, when installing windows, we want to make sure that we have our shims to make sure that we can hold that window plumb and square in while we're installing it and keep it installed appropriately. A big point that Kathy brought up was to make sure that we hold on to these gaskets. And if we can't hold on to these gaskets, there's an alternative route to go ahead and make sure that we can replace them. Now, most windows that are out there, Marvin and Anderson alike, if it is not a continuous flanged window, it is very important to make sure that we use something to make sure that we cover up the gaps between the top and the side flanges and keep that watertight when we're installing the window. Marvin is totally okay with us using products that we have on site to replicate the gaskets that they provide to ensure that we have a warranted application for their window. Well, now that we're ready to install the window, let's just double check one more thing before we put this window in. As we know, per Marvin's install best practices, they require a sealant on the head flange and the leg flange of the window. And before we make a big mess, Rob, let's double check and make sure this window is actually going to fit.
Absolutely.
Now we're actually ready to prep our rough opening and get this window installed. Rob, you want to show what we're going to be doing next?
Absolutely. So what we're going to do here, I'm going to put a bead of sealant on the sill, and then we're going to apply the piece of bevel siding to pitch our sill. Here we go. You'll notice that I'm going in a zigzag pattern, so we have good coverage across the entire sill.
And now the sealant that we're using is going to be the same sealant that we're going to use behind the window flanges of the Marvin Elevate window. And now Marvin has a requirement for their sealant when it comes to what to use behind the flanges of the windows. And the one we chose that's going to comply with Marvin's install best practices is Henry's Moist Stop sealant. It complies with an ASTM standard, which is NS Class 25, ASTM 920 is what they want to go ahead and make sure that you use. So for this application, it doesn't have to be Henry's sealant specifically, but make sure that we are complying with that ASTM standard 920, which Marvin wants you to use behind their flanged windows. Now, before we install our stretch wrap, in this case, we want to do a couple things. One, ensure we installed the bevel siding appropriately to create a positive drainage plane out onto the front of our weather-resistant barrier. Always double check with your code officials, but traditionally, code requires your stretch wrap to be applied a minimum 6 inches up on either side of the rough opening to make sure we have an appropriate watertight seal on that windowsill pan.
Brian, tell me what you're doing with that piece of seam tape.
Well, Rob, here we're actually using zip stretch tape. There's also other products out there called flex wrap. Sometimes when you have tapes that flex either lengthwise or sideways like this, they do have a tendency to want to go back to their original form. One thing I just want to show is a little trick of the trade that people are using out in the field to ensure when they stretch the tape down into the corner like we're going to do in a second, it doesn't want to stretch back to its original form and it'll stay where it needs to be. Apply a little piece of this seam tape that we use to tape our seams. We're going to put it a little piece right there. Got another piece right here. And we're creating a really nice area for the adhesion to grab onto other than the surface of the house wrap itself.
So now that we've applied the stretch tape to the sill, Brian's going to use a roller, in this case a zip roller, to roll this tape on, which is very important to ensure proper adhesion to the substrate, in this case the house wrap and the sill underneath. Go ahead, Brian.
Rob, I'm glad we talked about actually rolling the tape itself. Just to be more specific, any peel and stick tape or even the house wraps that are out these days require pressure, to Rob's point, to activate the adhesive to ensure that it's going to stick to the substrate appropriately and perform the way we want it to.
Okay, so now we're ready to install our window. What Brian's doing is unfolding our house wrap and bringing it around the rough opening. We're going to fasten our house wrap in place to the rough opening, and when that's done, we're going to get our window ready to go in. Okay, as we get ready to install our window, we're going to apply a bead of sealant around 3 sides of our opening, about a 1/2 inch from the edge of the rough opening. What Brian's going to do here is take a large marker and just demonstrate where we're going to put that bead of caulk.
And as Rob said, 1/2 inch up, 3/4 of an inch from the corner itself on both sides.
And the reason we want 3/4 of an inch on each side is because as we put pressure on that nailing fin, the caulk is going to squeeze out into that corner, and we don't want to have too much there where it goes all over the place.
So right before we put this window in, don't forget, we created an uneven sill for this window to sit on. So one thing we want to do is, right before we install the window, we want to take one of our composite shims to make a level playing field for that window to sit on when we go ahead and install it.
Okay, now that we've got our window in the opening, we're going to tack it in place, check it for plumb, level, and square, and then we're going to nail it off and move on to shimming. Something important to remember, you're going to want to use a 2-inch galvanized roof nail, and we're going to nail every other hole all the way around the nailing fin. Okay, now that we've tacked the window from the exterior, we're going to check a couple things on the inside and prepare to finish installing this window. You'll notice that the window has already been shimmed. I've shimmed 4 inches down from the top, 4 inches up from the bottom, 16 inches or less on center, and at each point of operation, in this case double hung at the check rail. I've also checked for square, measuring diagonal in both directions. The other thing we need to do is check the sill for level. Nice and level. In addition to checking diagonal, we also want to check in at least 3 directions across the window to make sure nothing's bowed and everything is shimmed correctly. Nice and even all the way through. The last thing we're going to want to do is check for proper operation. But before we do that, we need to remove the packing blocks that we spoke about earlier. I'm going to open the sash, use the tilt latches to tilt the sash in, remove the blocks, and then we'll check for proper operation of the bottom and the top sash. Now that we've got the interior of our window squared away, we're ready to weatherproof the exterior. Brian, you want to walk us through the flashing steps that we're going to follow to finish this installation?
Absolutely, Rob. Let's make sure before we actually flash this window, let's go over that little checklist like I talked about before. Let's make sure we have everything we need to appropriately flash this window per Marvin install best practice, as well as the weather resistant barriers install best practice. Again, let's start from the bottom. We're actually going to have a little rain skirt, which you'll see me install. It's a unique little recommendation from Marvin to help prevent any wind-driven rain from getting actually into the window opening itself. We want to make sure we have our gaskets for the corners. If we don't have these, we have the ability to make it out of the flashing tape that we're going to be using. Another thing we want to make sure we have is our window and door flashing along with the sealant as well. There's going to be a little unique detail to go ahead and make sure we do on the corner gaskets. As you can see, we already have those installed here on the window, and we'll show you how to use that sealant. So now Rob is actually going to show you what we're going to use that sealant for. Like I said, we've installed the corner gaskets, but once those are installed, we also want to apply a bead of that same sealant we use behind the window flanges right on the top corner of our corner gaskets to ensure a nice tight water seal at those corners. It's a very crucial detail to ensure we keep all the water out of this window opening. Rob, you want to show them real quick? Yeah. Perfect.
All right, so now our corner gaskets are applied, sealed. We're ready to install our rain skirt. Rain skirt is basically just a piece of house wrap with some seaming tape that we're going to apply to the bottom of the nail fin underneath the window. Let's go ahead and put that on.
Sure. Now, while we're applying this rain skirt, it's really important to take this seam tape and make sure we run it at least 1/4 inch up onto the actual window frame itself to ensure we get appropriate seal and we cover the full window flange itself. It's really going to help us ensure in extreme weather climates that we don't allow any of the exterior elements getting into our actual building itself.
Okay, so now we're going to apply our flashing tape. See, Brian already has a pre-cut section that he's going to use for one of the legs. We're going to do the legs first, followed by the head. Let's go ahead and put that on.
Sure. Now when we're applying our leg flashing itself, very similar to what we did with the rain skirt, we want to ensure that the flashing tape goes a minimum 1/4 inch up onto the actual window frame itself. When you look closely when you're installing these windows, the flange is actually a really great reference point to where you should actually be putting your tape itself. Now we're going to apply the tape a minimum 2 inches above our top flange itself, coming a 1/4 inch onto the actual window. It's nice working with a product like 3M because one, it's sticky, but two, the split release makes it really nice to make sure that we can get that 1/4 inch onto the window flange itself.
So now we have our window flashed with our 3M flashing tape. Brian, can you walk us through the system that we've created a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. As you can see, we started from the bottom of the window and worked our way all the way to the top. Just like we did with the house wrap, we want to ensure that everything is properly shingle flashed on the window, so when water hits the wall, it's going to drain downhill and have a seamless escape from the wall assembly itself. So one final detail that we want to point out to make sure everything is properly shingle flashed is the header piece right here. But first, let's just double check our header flashing. One important thing we want to look at is our header flash piece right here is above our leg flashing. This will ensure, again, the proper shingle flash of this window. Now, Rob, let's take this piece that we took at the beginning and tucked underneath, and as you can see, everything's going to flow nicely downhill and not get caught on any what they call leading or uphill laps. And before we're completely finished, Rob and I are going to take a piece of tape. And now, as you can see, we have a completely watertight and properly installed window.